Good afternoon. My name is Susanne Scholz, and I'm teaching Old Testament or Hebrew Bible at Perkins School of Theology. I am talking to you today in very unconventional format. So I'm talking without a script. Let's see what happens. We're talking about the Bible and how this book, a book since the 16th century only, but read much longer in the Jewish and in the Christian traditions, as a spiritually abusive text that has supported or was read in support of political, theological, psychological, economic, social abuse, structures of domination. And there's hardly an area in society in which the Bible was read that has not been shaped by ideas from the Bible. This is certainly true in Western societies of all kinds, in all their diversity, but also nowadays in countries where historically the Bible was not present. By now, billions of people read the Bible, so the situation is really serious. The good news is that in the last 50 years, maybe 60 by now, the cop-out hermeneutics that endorsed and helped people to read the Bible in line with structures of domination have been seriously criticized, and alternative reading modes have been proposed. The problem is that many people have never heard of it, and that it is to this very day just an emerging way of reading a text such as the Bible. The cop-out hermeneutics is still very dominant. And so we should not be surprised that most people, even when they have left biblical tradition behind, that they only know this kind of cop-out hermeneutics that is used to read the Bible as a means of discrimination and oppression. I mean, what has not been justified with the Bible? Slavery has been justified. Just go back to the 19th century and check out how both slaveholding advocates as well as abolitionists read the Bible, either in support of slavery or against it. Nowadays, the same is happening with gay sexualities. The United Methodist Church is going through this trouble right now. Do we read the Bible saying that we can discriminate against gay people and gay marriage as a form of theological support, or do we read the Bible saying, no, gay people can't be ordained and can't be married in the United Methodist Church? Sexism, women's rights to vote, was challenged for decades and wasn't even implemented. It didn't even occur to societies to have women being equal to men. The Eve and Adam story in Genesis 2 and 3 was used to justify this position for the centuries. And it took somebody like Ruth Bader Ginsburg to battle out the details in terms of American law. And we are grateful for it. So the cop-out hermeneutics is our big obstacle, and it consists of two features. One is what I call the PPS hermeneutic. We're reading the Bible for personal, privatized, and sentimentalized ways of nurturing our spiritual faith. And the other hermeneutic is grounded in what we call the historical critical method, where we apply a positivist, empiricist epistemology to distance ourselves from the text and to maintain that the meaning of the text is what the original authors thought it meant. And we are only the ones reconstructing that meaning. But there is yet another way, the third way, so to speak, and that is the cultural studies approach. And it's the way to go because it puts readers at the center of the interpretative enterprise. And this is important when we want to move out of the cop-out hermeneutics, when we read a text such as the Bible that has been used for so long to justify spiritual abuse in its various manifestations. What has happened in the past 50 or 60 years is that feminist Bible scholars have entered the scene, and many of them have challenged the cop-out hermeneutics and proposed that different ways of reading the text. They have deconstructed spiritually abusive interpretations, and spiritually abusive interpretations that have had serious impact on politics, economics, and geopolitics, and how we as Christians and Jews relate to people who are other. So the whole issue of colonialism also comes to play. And also prominently for feminist Bible interpreters, the question of sexual violence. I mean, we have read the Bible as a text about marriage and love, also about sexuality for almost 2,000 years. And we never read that the Bible contains sexual violence. Sexual violence as a topic was brought to our attention when we read the Bible only thanks to feminist Bible scholars in the late 70s and early 80s. So 50 years, we have developed an understanding that the texts that we have classified as marriage or texts about love or just plain sexual intercourse are actually stories about sexual violence. So we are standing at a moment of interpreting the Bible that has never been there before. It's an unseen moment since we have texts that we classify as the Bible. And that is actually the good news, and that is very exciting because we now have a growing body of literature that teaches us that we can read these texts in a way that exposes the sexual violence, reinscribes it away from just stories about love and marriage, distorting really the meaning of these texts for people who live in the Me Too movement era. And when we read the Bible in this way, we center on the readers who actually know about these oppressive forces in society from their own living experiences. So, for instance, when we read the Bible and we are deconstructing traditional, conventional meanings about marriage or love, and we find sexual violence in them, this is new. And there are many, many passages in the Bible that are about sexual violence. In fact, I feel give me a text and I show you how it is about sexual violence in the Bible. This is quite a statement, but I have to admit that if you go to a very important text that has justified homophobia for a long time, Leviticus 18:22, for instance, and you really translate this passage, lo and behold, it becomes a verse that's not even addressing male on male sexuality, but it addresses incestuous rape of a boy by a male relative. So the meanings, the conventional meanings that we think the passages have, turn upside down. And we learn how readerly assumptions about the meaning of the text shape the meaning of the text, and that other readers with other assumptions, such as a critical reading of what sexual violence is, come up with readings that expose the sexual violence. So what we have to come to recognize when we become critical readers of the Bible, when we deconstruct the cop-out hermeneutics and work with an hermeneutical approach and interpretation that sides with those who have been harmed by the cop-out hermeneutics, is that when we read the Bible, we actually have a kind of training ground in front of us. We are learning what are our assumptions about the meaning of a text. Where does it come from? How is it connected to our religious upbringing and traditions? How do our views relate to how previous interpreters read the biblical text? And this process helps us to become critical of our stereotypes, our assumptions about living in the world. Several years ago, I published an article, and it says something like this: tell me how you read the Bible, and I tell you who you are. Because there is no objective, universally true, value-free reading out there when you read the Bible. And by this, I don't only mean individually, but as people who stand in certain traditions and communities and social locations that are collectively defined. That our ways of reading these texts show us who we are and what we hold true on a deep level, and where our resistance is, and why it is so hard for so many people to let go of their rather prejudicial assumptions about what the Bible means and then what they have to do with it. Nowadays, there's so many people who escape away from fundamentalist Bible readings with which they were raised. And there are other ways of reading these texts that are much more liberatory. And if they're not liberatory, they are illuminative. Why we think the text means this or that. And that doesn't mean we have to submit to it. So the cultural studies approach of reading the Bible that sides with the those who were or are oppressed by hegemonic narratives about the Bible, that kind of reading gives space and breathing room to explore where we want to go by understanding where we're coming from, where we are, and where we want to go. And I think that is creates depth of meaning it creates also depth of thinking, and it creates a depth of knowing that ultimately we are not supposed to submit to anything, no less to a text, that these are constructs. And by working with these constructs, we can become agents in our own lives, individually and collectively. And I think when people feel trapped, whether it's by spiritual abuse, sexual abuse, racial abuse, class abuse, colonial abuse, to create alternative meanings is extremely helpful, because then we get a vision where we want to go, and then we have a goal in our lives, individually and collectively. And if we're lucky, we get there, but maybe our children and children's children will get there eventually. And I think in that sense, reading and studying the Bible, not with a cop-out hermeneutics, but with a hermeneutics that gives that kind of space, is absolutely necessary and essential if there's anything that's essential in our world. Thank you.